Welcome to the debate. Our source material today makes a pretty profound assertion that to achieve any kind of meaningful success, you fundamentally have to pursue what it calls great ambition.
Right.
And this raises a really critical question for us. Is the sheer scale of the dream, this pursuit of great ambition, is that the essential, necessary first step to a fulfilled life? Or is that framework, a bit too reductive? Does it minimize the strategic value of, say, incremental, consistent effort? I'm going to argue that the size of the dream is the defining factor in avoiding what the text calls the true regret.
And I'll be arguing that the essential focus should instead be on overcoming the fundamental psychological barrier, the fragile mindset, and developing tenacity through that diligent, consistent effort, really regardless of the starting goal scale.
Well, the premise here is that the true regret isn't failure. It's the realization late in life that your dreams were simply too small, and that's presented as more devastating than any single failed project. So to avoid being trapped in a small world, you have to embrace this key principle, building a life foundation that can actually support a great ambition. If your goals are too small, you guarantee a success-only record, which, it just means your targets were never large enough to foster genuine growth or meaningful risk. The scope, therefore, really defines the potential for growth and regret.
I see it a little differently. I mean, while scope is obviously important, the text identifies the real obstacle as the fragile mindset. It's this tendency where the fear of failure promotes an easy satisfaction with comfortable small wins. So the critical challenge then becomes developing tenacity, the willingness to completely rebuild after a major setback. If we focus exclusively on just scaling up the dream, we risk dismissing diligent, consistent effort. That measured, steady work that turns an amateur into a professional. We risk seeing that as just a small dream, when it's actually the essential mechanism of any real achievement.
I see why you emphasize effort, but let's go back to regret for a moment. The evidence in the text points to size being paramount because it dictates the potential for that profound ultimate regret. The limitations people feel later in life are shown to be self-imposed by their initial ambition, not by a later failure in execution. A failure of great ambition is inherently less regrettable than the profound emptiness that comes from achieving a goal that never really challenged you in the first place.
That's a strong distinction. But let's look at the underlying cause. Isn't the fragile mindset the root of this smallness? I mean, if we define that mindset as the fear of failure dictating how you set goals, then addressing that fear has to be the primary intervention. I'm just not convinced that simply telling someone to dream bigger actually addresses the psychological paralysis that prevents them from setting those ambitious goals to begin with. We have to tackle the fear before the goal can expand. And that, brings us back to the core mechanism of diligent, consistent effort. This steady, accumulating work is explicitly defined as the path from competence to mastery. So if we're focused on cultivating that competence and building confidence, how do we justify potentially devaluing those essential, incremental steps that form the foundation of any large achievement?
No, and I acknowledge the necessity of that steady work, but I would frame the relationship differently. The effort must be directed toward a great ambition foundation. If the ceiling is low, the consistent effort itself becomes the ceiling, trapping you in that small, unfulfilling world. The effort is only meaningful in the context of the material's warning if the intended structure is vast enough to require that level of continuous commitment and, frankly, profound risk. And furthermore, only a goal of sufficient scope, a great ambition, provides the motivational necessity to cultivate true tenacity. Small dreams, they permit easy abandonment. When the stakes are that high, the motivation to start again from zero after a catastrophic failure becomes a defining characteristic of success.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered whether a singular, early focus on great ambition might actually increase the paralysis caused by the fragile mindset? I mean, if the goal is that immense, major setbacks can feel existentially catastrophic, which just reinforces that self-limiting fear. Perhaps the small wins you get through diligent, consistent effort serve as a kind of necessary mental scaffolding, allowing someone to develop the resilience to successfully rebuild before committing to that singular, massive life goal.
So for me, our analysis points to a clear mandate. To pursue a truly meaningful life, you have to define the journey by great ambition right from the outset. That scope is the non-negotiable prerequisite to avoid the profound regret of smallness.
That's an interesting point, though. I would still frame it differently. While ambition is essential, the material also highlights that overcoming the fragile mindset through focused effort and tenacity is arguably the more actionable and critical step. It's the fundamental training required to sustain any goal, regardless of its initial size.
So the ongoing exploration within this framework, then, is precisely where that balance lies between establishing the scope of a great ambition and ensuring you have the consistent, resilient process required to actually see that ambition through.